Welcome to the 9th mini-lecture for Understanding the Social World. In this mini-lecture, we ask how we can understand a very specific form of marginalisation. This is the marginalisation faced by black women in online dating that Lin and Lundquist describe in their journal article, Mate Selection in Cyberspace, the intersection of race, gender and education. In their article, Lin and Lundquist examine how race, gender and education affect interaction among heterosexual daters online. While they find that, overall, racial homophily dominates search behaviour for both men and women, what we are keenly interested in here is the racial hierarchy that emerges in the process of responding to messages. Women respond only to men of similar or more dominant racial status, while non-black men respond to all but black women. Lin and Lundquist write in their discussion, most importantly, our results show that although these patterns differ by gender, a common thread is that black women and black men are clearly disadvantaged in the dating market relative to other ethnic groups. Being black on the dating market, particularly being a black female, means that one's invitations are most likely to be ignored. They go on to state even more plainly, our results, however, make a strong case that the discrimination against black women is the single largest marginalisation of note. While black men are indeed marginalised in the online dating work that the authors researched, black women are somehow marginalised more. What can we make of this? Kimberly Williams Crenshaw, a critical race scholar, developed a concept that can allow us to think about the way that black women are subject to multiple intersecting forms of discrimination. Crenshaw introduced the concept of intersectionality to feminist theory as a way to describe the different effects that systems of oppression have on black women, as opposed to white women and black men. That is, while white women may experience sexism, they do not experience racism. While black men may experience racism, they do not experience sexism. White men, of course, experience neither racism nor sexism. Let me explain. Because racism is a form of discrimination enacted by a dominant group against a subordinate group based on their racial or ethnic difference, white people in the West do not experience racism. Racism is a systematic and structural oppression that white people simply do not suffer in Australian culture. That is not to say that a white person can't be discriminated against because they are white, just that it does not constitute racism. And because sexism is a form of discrimination enacted by men against women as a subordinate group based on sex and gender difference, men in patriarchal societies like ours do not experience sexism. Sexism is a systematic and structural oppression that men simply do not have to contend with in a patriarchal society. That is not to say that a man cannot be discriminated against because he is a male or masculine, just that it does not constitute sexism. Black women, however, experience sexism and racism and another form of oppression that only exists where racism and sexism intersect and interact. This is intersectional disadvantage or oppression. Intersectionality is not simply a means to count up axes of identity to win a game of who is worst off. It is a tool that allows us to conceptualise forms of oppression that many do not experience and that broad approaches to systematic forms of oppression like racism and sexism do not address. While it was born out of a black feminist approach to legal scholarship, thanks to Crenshaw, it has uses beyond the intersection of race and sex. Intersectionality allows us to think about how other axes of identity, like ability, sexuality and socio-economic status, interact to produce our lived realities. A particularly fruitful employment of intersectionality allows us both to recognise the role of identity categories in society while also providing a means to address intersectional disadvantage, which might not be confronted by single-issue approaches like some forms of anti-racism and feminism. Let's return then to the opening question of this mini-lecture. How can we understand the specific form of marginalisation faced by American black women in the online dating world traced by Lin and Lundquist? First, racial stratification produces a hierarchy with whiteness at the top and blackness at the bottom. Black women are marginalised a first time in this way. Second, stratification based on sex informs that hierarchy, with women subordinated to men at every level. Black women are marginalised a second time in this way. Third, black women experience intersectional disadvantage in such a system where their femininity is affected or impinged on by their blackness and vice versa. Black femininity is, in this way, masculinized in comparison to white femininity because of the attribution of hypermasculinity to blackness. Now, this is a very hastily sketched vignette of a lived reality for black women in America. Describing such a lived reality is, by necessity, a simplification. As you've no doubt come to appreciate over the first 4 weeks of this course, human lives are exceedingly complex. We have introduced race in this first week of Module 2 in order to introduce the concept of intersectionality, which allows us to address this complexity in a meaningful way. How the various axes of our identities intersect and affect one another should be held in the forefront of your minds going forward. In this way, we can draw out connections between the weekly themes that have been separated for ease of learning. Put another way, race and ethnicity are never lived separately to a person's class, or their sex, gender and sexuality, or their age and ability, and so on. We simply break them apart in order to think about them, but they are always lived out together. In line with the social value of sociology mentioned in week 1, an intersectional view of identity provides a systemic way and a systematic way to analyse inequalities that are harder for us to see, because they are not the most conspicuous and are experienced by the most marginalised among us.